In this video, I will be showing you how to sew a vintage shirt step by step using the patterns I cut out in my previous video. If you are yet to see that video, the link to the video is in the description below. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, and if this is your first time of watching my video, this is Reggie School of Fashion. On this platform, I upload fashion designing content regularly for both male and female, using pattern drafting, which is a world standard method in clothing construction. That is why you need to subscribe to my channel if you haven't, so that you won't miss any of these opportunities. My name is Bolaji, and let's meet in class after this timeout. Here are my patterns pinned together with the fabric. I have the front and the back panels here. So this is the back panel and this is the front panel. On the back panel, my fabric is unfolded. As you can see, this is because the center back will not be opened like that of the front. Okay, so I have the fabric unfold. So this is the center of the back and this is the center of the fabric. So if you have been following me closely from the beginning of this tutorial, you will notice I did not add any seam allowance on my pattern. All seam allowances will be added on the fabric. So now I've added all my seam allowances, which I will be explaining. On the neckline, I added 1/2 inch of seam allowance upward. The measurement was taken upward, okay, and I follow the shape of the neckline. So I have my seam allowance in finishing the neckline. Then on the shoulder line, 1/2 inch is needed to join the front and the back panels together. So you can see I measured the 1/2 inch upward as well. So I have my markings on the fabric. So when you are marking your fabrics, make sure you do this on the wrong side. I did mine on the right side because I want you to see the beauty of the fabric. Okay, so after adding 1/2 inch on the shoulder line, 1/2 inch is needed on the armhole to attach the sleeve as well, and this was taken forward, okay, like so, following the shape I have on the armhole. Then you mark bit by bit. So after marking bit by bit, then you can connect all the dotted points together. Then you will have a shape of the armhole. Then by the side, I added 1 inch as seam allowance. Okay, so this is to join the side seams together. The measurement was taken from the point of the armhole, which is here forward, 1 inch. And don't forget, I've added 1/2 inch on the armhole. This was taken upward. Okay, when I get to this point, I took the measurement upward. That was why I was able to extend this outward. Okay, so from here to this point is 1 inch. From this point to this point is 1 inch. So on the waistline, I added 1 inch. On the hip level, I added 1 inch. Then on the shirt length, I added 1 inch. Then I connected the point together the same way I connected the side when I was drafting the pattern. So which means I used the same ruler. Then on the lower part of the shirt, I added 1.5 inches. The 1.5 inches is what I will be using in hemming the lower part. So that is all for the back panel. Then on the front panel of the vintage shirt, I repeated the same process. Here is the neckline for the front panel. Okay, I added 1/2 inch around the neckline from this point, which is the HPS, 1/2 inch upward. Okay, so this is the way I took the measurement, and I followed the shape I have on the pattern, and I stopped on this point. I stopped exactly on this point. Okay, then at this point, this is the lapel. At the lapel point, I took this up also by 1/2 inch, because when I'm ready to attach the collar, it's going to start from this point. So if I did not take this up by 1/2 inch, I will be taking away from the measurements I have for the length of the lapel. So that is why you have to take this point up by 1/2 inch. Then you'll be able to extend the neckline to meet at this point. Then whatever you have here, which is the shape of the lapel, will be extended upward to meet that 1/2 inch point. Okay, then on the shoulder line I added 1/2 inch, on the armhole 1/2 inch, then by the side 1 inch, and at the lower part of the vintage shirt I added 1.5 inches. So with this I'm good to cut out my fabric. Now to the front panel of the vintage shirt. I did not need any seam allowance at the center front anymore because I already added a button allowance at the center front, so which is here. So I'll be taking out from this button allowance to finish the center front. That was why I did not add any. You can see there is no markings along this side. Okay, so I did not add any seam allowance. I already added my button allowance, so I will just be cutting like so. After cutting out the fabric, the next step is to place notches on the fabric. This step is very important. Do not skip the step. If you have not placed notches on your fabric, do not remove the pattern. If you remove the pattern, this can cause a lot of front and back when you are constructing the vintage shirt, because you will not know where each point falls by the time you are constructing the shirt. So placing notches on your fabric is very important. It will make your work faster and it will make it easier. So these are the important places I will be placing my notches. First, I will place notches at the center back. This is the neckline. So with this, I will know where the center back falls. Notching means cutting a little. Okay, then I'll place notches here, the HP here, so I will know where the seam allowance falls at that point. Shoulder line. The midpoint of 4 inches, the center, that is where the shoulder line would be. I'll place notches on that point as well. Okay. Then at the 4 inches point, I will place notches. Armhole, so I will know where the seam allowance starts. On the waist level, I will place my notches over there as well. On the hip level, I'm placing my notches. Then on the vintage shirt length, here is a length before the hem allowance. So with this, I will know the exact point my hem allowance starts. At times, it can skip your mind. You may not know the exact value you added for your seam allowance, but once you have these notches, so this will help you to remember. Okay, so once I see these notches, I will just take the measurements and I will know I added 1.5 inches for my seam allowance. Then at the lower part of the vintage shirt, I will place notches at the center. So this is the center. So the back panel is settled. So with this, I can remove my pattern. So for the front panel, because this is a notch collar shirt, it is very important to pay attention to every point you have on at the center rather. Okay, this point I have here is the lapel point. This is a lapel point. I will place notches on that point. This is the center front point. This is the center front point. I will place notches on that point as well. Can you see what I have? Then on the shoulder line, So I will know where the seam allowance starts on the shoulder line. The other side of the shoulder line, I'm placing notches on that point as well. Okay, then on the armhole, I have my notches. Then on the waistline, I have my notches. On the hip level, I have my notches. Then at the vintage shirt length, I'm placing my notches. Okay, so I'm not stopping this. I will have to place notches at the center front as well, because this is going to be in 2 pieces. Okay, so I'll be placing notches on each point as well. The shirt length, I'll place notches. Hip level, I'll place my notches. Waist level, I'll place my notches. I'm cutting this together with the pattern because they both align. Okay, so on the chest level as well, I'm cutting this. This point is very important. That is the length of the lapel. You can see the points. This is where the notch will meet the lapel. At this point, it is very important to place your notches. Please do not skip this step. Okay, so I have my notches here. So with this, I know the exact point my lapel stops. After cutting out the front and the back panels of the vintage shirt, the next step is to cut out the facing. Because this shirt is without lining, we have to finish the edges of the center front. So that is why we'll be cutting out facing for the front. And as you can see, I have my fabric folded into 2, and I placed the front panel. So I'll be using this as a template to cut out the facing. So with this, I don't need to start adding seam allowances up and down, because I already added my seam allowance on the fabric. Okay, so I have my fabric folded into 2. I want this to give the front panel a contrast. That was why I folded it on the wrong side. So here is the wrong side for the fabric I'll be using in cutting out the facing, and this is the front panel of the vintage shirt itself. So that is the colored side. I transferred the shape I have at the center front on the fabric, as you can see, with the yellow chalk. So I marked it out. So after marking out the shape, then at the lower part, I measured 4 inches forward. Okay, so which means the width of the facing will be 4 inches. Then I have it like so. That is the marked point. Then at the upper part as well, I measured 4 inches forward. That is on the neckline. And here is the point. So with this, I can remove the front panel of the shirt. But before removing this, I will be pinning this. That is the fabric I'll be using out in cutting out the facing, so that it doesn't get shifted. So I promise you, I'll make this as simple as possible. So now I can remove the front panel. Okay, so this is what I have. Then I will be connecting this together with my long straight ruler. Okay, so I closed the lower part and I closed the upper part. So this is the length of the vintage shirt. So this is the length. So then the upper part as well. So I'll be cutting this out on a straight line. So when I'm ready to attach it, if I have any excess at the upper part, I will definitely trim it off. So the facing is ready, then I can cut it out. And also I mark the notched point. Every notch point I have on the front panel, I transfer the point on the facing as well. So here is one. Here is another one. Okay. So I have another notch point here. So I'm placing the notches instantly. So now I've cut out the collar. You can see this is what I have for the collar. Here is the pattern. I cut one on fold and I cut the other one in pieces. One is going to be the under collar, while the other one is going to be the upper collar. So the one on fold is the upper collar. As you can see, I have it on fold here. So this is the upper collar and this is the under collar. So when you are cutting the under collar, make sure you add 1/2 inch of seam allowance to join this together. Okay, so that is all about the cutting of a vintage shirt. So now it's time to join the pieces together, which I've attached the yoke. So here is the yoke, and I've also attached the pocket. So if you don't know how to attach a shirt yoke is totally different from native shirt yoke. Okay, so this is a vintage shirt and the yoke was attached the same way you attached a button down shirt yoke. I have a well-detailed tutorial which is part of this video series on how to attach a yoke on your vintage shirt. Okay, as you can see, this is what I have on the right side of the yoke, and I have the same thing on the wrong side of the yoke. You can see what I have. This is the wrong side of my vintage shirt. So at the upper part, this is the part I attached the yoke. You can see what I have over there, and I also joined the shoulders together. This is what I have on the wrong side of the shoulder. You can see how neat it is. And also on the right side, I have this. All these are part of this tutorial where you will get to learn how to join the shoulder line together in such a way the seam allowance will be inside the front and back. It's going to be in between the front and the back panel. And at the same time, you will not tamper with the neck area. Can you see what I have on the neck area? You can see what I have on the neck area. Okay, so the video has been linked up in the description below, so make sure you watch the video after watching this correct one. And also I attached the pocket at the front of the vintage shirt. So you can see my pocket is looking neat and beautiful. I already have a well-detailed video on how to attach a shirt pocket. The video has been linked up in the description as well. After attaching the yoke and the pockets, which I've done, the next step is to attach the collar. So here I have my collar. One is going to be the top collar and the other one is going to be the under collar. So this is going to be the under collar and I cut it in pieces like so. So here is the shoulder line. So I'll be joining this together on the shoulder line, and I did not fuse the under collar, as you can see. So this is going to be the top collar. The top collar is on fold when I cut. So this is the shoulder line. No, there's no joining on the shoulder line. Okay, then I fuse this. I fuse this with a soft fusible interfacing. So which means when you are cutting out the under collar, you have to add extra 1/2 inch at the top, which you will use in joining the shoulders together like so. If I did not add this seam allowance, the collar will be shorter than the top collar. So the first step is to join this together. Now I've joined the shoulders together, as you can see, and this is what I have after joining. Okay, so this is the neckline area. So now I will be attaching this to the main vintage shirt. So this is the shirt. Okay, so this, the under collar is going together with the shirt. And the positioning is the right side of the collar facing the right side of the shirt, like so. So I'll be placing the center of the collar on the center of the shirt. Then I'll pin the points together. I also open up the seam allowance, as you can see. Then I will come to this edge. This is the notched part. You can see the shape I have here is different from what I have around here. So this is the notched part of the collar. So I will bring this closer to the front of the vintage shirt. What I have from this point to this point is the back. So now from this point forward is the front. This is the front neckline. So I'll be taking this and bring it to the front neckline, like so. And on the front neckline as well, I have a notched point. So here is a notched point. Then I will fold in the 1/2 inch of seam allowance I have on the collar at this side. I'll be folding this inward like so. Then I will place the collar on the notched point and I will open up the seam allowance. So which means I will not start stitching from the edge of the collar because I still need an allowance to finish these edges. Then I will pin the remaining parts of the neckline together. Okay, now I've pinned one side of the shirt and I'll be repeating the same process on the other side. So this is the other side of the collar. You can see this part I was showing you the other time. You can see the flat side. So this is the notched part I cut out on the pattern. So I'll be folding this inward by 1/2 inch, like so. Then the notch point I have on the shirt, you can see the notch part. Then I'll place this on the notch part, then I'll open it up. So again, this is not going to fall exactly at the edge of the notch part because we need a seam allowance to finish the edges. Then I will pin the points together and I will continue pinning the remaining parts of the neckline. So after pinning my collar together with the shirt, this is what I have. Okay, and I will be stitching with 1/2 inch seam allowance all round. From this point I will pick 1/2 inch, then stitch all round from one edge of the center front to the other edge of the center front. As you know, I used 4 inches when I was drafting the pattern for the collar. Okay, so here I have 4 inches. This 4 inches is together with my seam allowance. I will be needing 1/2 inch around the neckline and 1/2 inch on the other side of the collar. So which means at the end of the day I will end up having 3 inches for the height of my collar. So now I'm stitching the collar with 1/2 inch seam allowance I added. Then I started stitching from the notched point. When you are doing this, make sure you do it carefully. So now I'm almost done with the stitching. Okay, as you can see, I'm towards the other side of the neckline. And I will stop on the notched point. Don't forget, you have to stop on the notched point, which is here. Here is the notched point, so that is the point I will be stopping. and I will lock my stitches. So this is what I have after attaching the collar. Can you see this is the wrong side and this is the right side? So the next step is to notch the seam allowance. I will just be notching all around so that this will be able to lay flat around the neck. So after placing notches on the seam allowance, you can see what I have. Then I will be top stitching on the under collar. This is the under collar, so I'll be top stitching on the under collar. I'm not top stitching on the vintage shirt. Okay, so which means my seam will fall on the under collar. So the seam allowance will be facing the collar like so, not like this. If I should position it like so, this is going to fall on the shirt itself, but I will be positioning it on the collar. Okay, then I will bring this to the right side, open it up, then apply a top stitch. As you are stitching, make sure you are checking your seam allowance if it's at the right position. As I'm top stitching, I'm opening up the seam like so. I'm spreading the collar and the shirt. So with this part will not look bulky. It will look very flat and neat. Okay, so I will stop at the notch point and I will lock my stitches. So this is what I have after top stitching the collar. Can you see what I have? This is the right side and this is the wrong side. So the next step is to attach the top collar. So the top collar will be attached together with the facing. Now it's time to finish the center front of the shirt. Okay, you need to pay a closer attention at this point. Here is the front of the shirt. You can see I have the part in two places, two pieces. Okay, so this is the collar I attached, the under collar, and this is the back of the shirt. I have two pieces of facing cut out to finish the two sides. So I will be picking one of the facing. Then I will position this the right side facing the right side. When I was cutting out this facing, I traced out the shape I have at the center front. And if you look at this closely, you will see they both have the same shape. So which means in finishing this part, the facing is coming to the wrong side of the shirt. So you can see I have the two edges matched properly. This is the facing and this is the shirt. Then I will pin the two together. This is the most important part of this tutorial, so you have to pay a closer attention. Okay, so after pinning the two, then I will be stitching with 1/2 inch seam allowance. From the edge, I will measure 1/2 inch downward and I will stop at this point. That is the point I started attaching the collar. You can see the brown thread I have here. This point. So I'll be stopping exactly at this point. I will start the stitching from here, then stop at this point. Don't forget this is the lapel. Okay, this is the lapel side of the shirt. So that is what I'm doing right now. I will stop at this point. Okay. So after stitching, this is what I have. Can you see? So this is the facing. So this is the lapel side I have attached together. Okay. So the next step is to pick the top collar. In attaching the top collar together with the under collar, don't forget it's going to be the right side facing the right side like so. Then I will pin the center together. I'm not attaching it yet, but I have to do this. So I will just pin the center together and leave it aside. Then I'll come to this side. This flat side is a notched side. On this flat side, I have the same flat side on the under collar. This is the under collar. I did not fuse the under collar, but I fused the top collar. So this flat side, which is the notched side, I have that same shape on the under collar. So I'll be placing the notched side on the top collar to align with the notched side on the under collar like so. Can you see what I have? Then I will secure this together with my sewing pin. So after securing this with my sewing pin, then I will be joining the two together. There is a point where the seam stops here when I was attaching the collar. This is the point. Then I will stitch from this point with half of an inch forward until I get to the center, to this point. From this point forward, half of an inch, as in I'm stitching along that straight line. That is a notched line. So that is what I will be doing right now. Now I'm positioning my needle to fall on the starting point. So that is the point where I stopped attaching the collar that I showed you earlier. Then I will be taking this forward with half of an inch. And I will make sure the two edges align properly. So can you see the shape I have around here already? You can see that shape. Okay, so the next step is to attach the top collar together with the facing. Here is the facing and this is the remaining side I have left for the facing. So I will be placing this side on the collar and stop wherever the facing stops. Okay, at the point where the facing stops. So this is the facing I attached earlier. It stops here. So now I'm taking this, the remaining part of the facing, to align with the collar. We are going through this process because there is no lining on the shirts. If it is a shirt with lining, it will be much easier than this. So I will pin the two together like so. Then I will stitch from where this seam stops. You can see where it stops. It started from here and stops here. From this point, I will pick the stitching and I will stitch all through to the end of the facing, which is this side. Then I'm stitching with half of an inch seam allowance. So now I'm stitching from this side. Here is the facing. This is where the facing stops. Then I will stitch on the half of an inch seam allowance and stop on this same point. So this is what I have after stitching. You can see where my seam stops. Okay, so the next step is to finish the center front downward with the facing. You can see the positioning of my facing is still the right side facing the right side. Right side of the facing facing the right side of the shirt. Then I'll pick this together and stitch with 1/2 inch downward. So now I'll be stitching with 1/2 inch seam allowance downward from the upper part to the lower part of the shirt. This point that I stopped is a lapel point. So I have to stop here because the shape I have here is different from the shape I have at the lower part. So I have to lift up my presser foot, then adjust my fabric and continue stitching. So can you see what I have after stitching? So this is what I have. So this will be coming outward like so. So that is when I'm ready to turn this inside. Can you see what I have? So after attaching the facing, the next step is to top stitch on the facing. Okay, so that this will be able to turn inside easily. So the seam allowance will be lying on the facing like so. Then I will top stitch on the facing. After top stitching on the facing, then I will overlock the edges of the facing upward. Not through like so. I will overlock the edges. Then I will stop at the lapel point. This point. This is where I'm stopping the top stitching. Now this side of the vintage shirt is settled, and the next step is to turn the facing to the wrong side. Okay, and in doing this I will have to trim off the seam allowance I have here. So that I will be able to push this outward as much as possible, and I will relock that point so that the seam will not rip off. So now I can push this outward, then send the facing to the wrong side of the vintage shirt. I will still have to trim this off. So now I will be pushing this outward like so and send the facing to the wrong side of the vintage shirt. So this is what I have. Here I have the lapel. Okay. And here is the facing for the shirt. So I will give this a good press so that it's laying flat and neat. And I'll be repeating the same process from A to Z, which I have applied to this side of the vintage shirt. I'll be applying the same method on the other side. Don't forget, the front panel of the vintage shirt is in 2 pieces. This is the first piece and this is the second piece. So every process I've applied on this side of the shirt will be applied on the other side of the shirt as well. Now I'm done with the construction of the other side of the shirt. Okay, as you can see, this is the other side and this is the side I did earlier. So can you see what we have now? And this is the collar. So the next step is to join the top collar and the under collar together. Here is the under collar and this is the top collar. Then I will have to flip this over in such a way right side of the top collar will be facing the right side of the under collar, like so. And I have the center notch on my top collar and I also have the center joining on the under collar. So this is the center joining on the under collar and this is the center notch I have on the top collar. Then I will make the 2 points to meet each other like so. Then I will secure this with my pin. Now I have my collars pinned together, as you can see. Then I will stitch with 1/2 inch seam allowance all around the collar. After joining the top and the under collar together like so, the next step is to top stitch on the under collar. Please take note of this. This is the top collar and this is the under collar. So which means the seam allowance will be laying flat on the under collar like so. And I will top stitch on the under collar. Okay, so when you are top stitching, it is not necessary you start from the beginning of the collar because we have a corner point around here. Okay, you can just pick it from any point that you find convenient for yourself. And on the other side as well, I will go as much as I can. So when I'm about to get to this point, I will stop. Then the next step is to notch the seam allowance. So that is the seam allowance I have inside the collar. After notching, the next step is to trim off the seam allowance. So now I will be turning the collar inside out like so. And I'll push out the edges as much as I can. Then on the other side as well. So after turning, this is what I have. So the next step is to give this side a good press. Then I will finish the edges of the collar. I'll be folding this side inside like so with 1/2 inch seam allowance to cover up the seam allowance I have inside the shirt. Like so. Then I will stitch all around. Now I've given my collar a good press and I also pinned the edges of my collar, as you can see. So now I'll be stitching at the edges all around. I'm giving this a very close edge stitch. If you don't want the edges of your collar to get to this point, this is determined by the wideness of your facing. You can see where my facing stops. That is the point I will start stitching the collar. If the wideness of my collar get to this point, so it means I will be applying the edge stitches from this point. Okay, so the wideness of your facing determines where you start stitching the collar, purposely because there is no lining at the back panel of the vintage shirt. Okay. This is what I have after finishing the edges of the collar. You can see it's looking nice and beautiful. Okay, so I will have something like this on the right side of the shirt. You can see the notch parts really come out well and is looking elegant. So that is the collar, and you can see the shape I gave my collar around here. It is not on a straight line, which makes it look more beautiful. Now that I've constructed the collar, the next step is to finish the vintage shirt itself. Okay, and I'll be attaching the sleeve. Here are the sleeves I cut out, 2 pieces for the sleeve. In case you don't know how to construct a basic sleeve, watch my video on how to draft a basic sleeve pattern. All you need to do is just to insert the desired length. So because this is a vintage shirt, when you are taking the sleeve measurement, it has to stop on the bicep height point. If you don't know what bicep height point, watch my video on how to take measurements for a male figure. You get to understand where the bicep height stops or what it means. So after getting the bicep height point, then you take the circumference of that point. It can be above that point, but it shouldn't be below the point. So you take the circumference measurement of the point. So that is what you'll be inserting on the hemline of the shirt. So once you watch my video on how to draft a basic sleeve pattern, which has been linked up in the description box, you will get to understand on how to draft this if you cannot do this. So now I will be attaching the sleeve together with the shirt. I will join the sides together after attaching the sleeve. Then I will hem the lower part of the vintage shirt, then hem the opening of the sleeve as well. I'll give it a good press and I'll be back to show you the final result of our beautiful vintage shirt. So guys, here is the final look of our vintage shirt. You can see what we have at the end of the day. That is looking nice. So here is a collar. This is a lapel. This is a notch. The back yoke. The pocket. The sleeve. You can see the sleeve opening. I've hemmed the sleeve opening. And I also hemmed the lower part. So here is the lower part. And this is the button allowance. So this is where the button will be fixed. Don't forget I added 1.5 inches to the center front as my button allowance. And I used 1/2 inch as seam allowance to attach the facing. So which means I'm having 1 inch left from the center forward. So that is what I'll be using as the button allowance. That is the point I will fix my button. And the button holes will be at the top. Like so, then I will button it up. So guys, you can see what we have. It's looking nice. This is the back of the shirt. You can see the collar at the back. And this is the front of the shirt. Thanks so much guys for watching this video to the end. Go ahead and like this video and also subscribe to my channel. I want to believe you've gotten value in this video. Feel free to send in your questions as I will be right here to answer them all. Thank you once again and see you in my next video. But then, always do remember, there is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs.